What on earth drives someone to do something like this? And this, the worst kind of hate crime you can imagine. And does it coincide with a rise of anti-Semitism that we have heard about, not just in this country, but certainly in continental Europe as well? Is the United States suffering from this, or is this a very, very rarefied account and is not the sort of thing that would be of any common experience? I speak to Gideon Falter, who knows a bit about this. He's the chairman of the campaign against anti-Semitism. When you heard about this yesterday, Gideon, what were your first thoughts?
You know, it's such a distressing and horrific crime that has taken place. This was a baby naming ceremony which was burst in upon by a gunman who, judging by his social media posts, is someone who was just intent on killing Jews. He believed, amongst other things, that Jews are mass importing Muslims into the United States in order to supposedly dilute the white race. I mean, this is a crazed extremist who has gone out and taken a firearm, not an assault weapon, and gone out intent on killing Jews. And the thing is, if this were such a freak occurrence, we might actually be in some way comforted. But this isn't a freak occurrence. We've seen these attacks taking place on the kosher supermarket in Paris, on the Jewish museum, on the school in Toulouse. We've seen time after time Jews being gunned down by one extremist or another. And the fact is that around the world, we're now seeing a huge amount of incitement against Jews. We're seeing so many extremists, be they far left, far right or Islamist, using their ideology to really encourage and call for their followers to go out and kill. And I think this is a good example. This Robert Bowers is somebody who, as far as we can see, had no prior criminal convictions, but he did have a social media timeline which was absolutely drenched in hatred. And so whilst he hadn't committed crimes before, as far as we know, and wasn't therefore on any particular police radar, although maybe more information will come out about that, what certainly should have happened is that we should have been aware of him from his social media. And I think that what happens far too often is that people look at what happens online and they say, it's just online, don't worry about it. And then all of a sudden, someone like this comes out, and it's not all of a sudden. This is something where extremists are thriving at the moment, and far too little is being done to try and bring these people to book and to stop them from getting to the kind of stage where they're able to go out and carry out an attack.
Let's talk about it from your field of expertise, Gideon. Anti-Semitism. Are you convinced that it is getting worse?
Well, the figures from not just the UK but around the world tell us that it is. In the UK, every year since 2014 has been a new record-breaking year for anti-Semitic hate crime. And yet these crimes are largely going unprosecuted, and we're seeing in each year only a couple of dozen prosecutions each time. We're actually currently suing the Crown Prosecution Service over one of its recent decisions, not just to not prosecute someone, but to actually block us from privately prosecuting someone. And so we're seeing in this country a real failure to tackle these extremists at source. And a lot of people look at Jewish community institutions, and I heard earlier on in the day a number of your callers observing that many Jews, when they pass Jewish community institutions, be it a Jewish school or a synagogue, they see the amount of security that there is outside, bomb-proof measures, special entrances designed to stop people entering, bulletproof everything, guards outside, security scanners. And we've got into a situation, not just in Britain, but all over Europe, where it's now completely normal and completely expected when you go and visit any Jewish community building to expect airport-style security. And the problem with all of that is that what we're doing is we're trying to reduce the threat, the physical security threat to Jewish people, but we're not dealing with the source of that threat, and that is these extremists who we can only protect ourselves against with the help of the state, and the state is just not doing enough to tackle this kind of extremism. And so it's extremely sad when the whole Jewish community around the world is very much in mourning for what's happened in Pittsburgh, but we're also very concerned about the trends that this is part of. And I think one of the things that I found quite remarkable is that in the wake of terrorist attacks, say in Paris, also in London and Manchester and in each city, each time we see this huge outpouring on social media of people doing things like changing their profile pictures and sort of showing signs of solidarity. And we are seeing some of that in this case. We're also seeing a huge number of people, including figures like Baroness Jenny Tong, saying, yeah, well, kind of predictable, wasn't it, because the Jewish state does this, or because other people saying, well, Jews kind of do deserve it. They behave in this terrible way. And the fact is, no one, the very few people, seem to want to really come forward, put their arm around the Jewish community, and say, we recognise this for what it is. This is a crazed extremist who just wanted to kill Jews. There was nothing that Jews did or didn't do that caused this to happen. What caused it to happen was an extremist who became radicalised, probably online, but I'm sure we'll find out more about it, and who wasn't stopped by the forces that were there and supposed to stop him.
OK, Jenny Tong's obviously not here to defend herself. I have to say that in the light of what you've just said. But yeah, I noticed it. I do some charity work for a Jewish organisation that basically helps young Arabs and Jews and Druze in Israel play football together. Pretty harmless stuff, but it's kind of teaching them how to kind of we're not all that different actually. So, and I know the security is like a fortress when you try and go in there for a meeting to discuss what you're going to do. So I totally understand where you're coming from. So tell me, what more can the state do to protect Jews? Let's start in this country.
Well, certainly in this country, the first thing that needs to be done is prosecution, because a lot of these people feel, and we monitor anti-Semitism very carefully, not just the actual phenomenon, but the people who commit it. And the people who commit it feel that it's very unlikely that anything will ever happen to them, that there'll ever be some kind of criminal consequence for them. And largely, they're right, and we're trying to change that at the moment. We're taking a lot of legal action to try to force the Crown Prosecution Service into action. But I think one of the gravest threats that we're seeing is that so many of these anti-Semitic crimes go completely unpunished. And that's not because police forces don't want to protect Jews. On the contrary, we see a lot of police forces putting a lot of time and effort into pursuing these cases. It's because once they get to the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, they just end up on a pile somewhere and aren't dealt with. And the other problem is that we are increasingly seeing in our public discourse this very, very extreme form of anti-Semitism, which is now very prevalent on social media, which is a worldwide phenomenon. And a lot of countries are powerless to do very much about it. But one of the things that I think we need to see more of is social networks taking responsibility. If I were to post a video online which contained inappropriate images of children, or which contained, for example, a popular Disney soundtrack or something like that, automated tools developed by Google, by Facebook, by Twitter would immediately seize on that and take it to pieces and stop me from posting that material and ban my account. Yet if I want to put up videos day after day saying that Jews drink the blood of non-Jewish children, that Jews are controlling the world's economy and finances and politics, those tools aren't used to stop that kind of hatred. So we're actually seeing situations where these huge international companies, which governments have a great deal of difficulty bringing under control, those companies have technology which could make a huge impact on this kind of hatred, and they are simply not deploying it to deal with hatred.
All right, Gideon, thank you. Gideon Falter, Chairman of Campaign Against Anti-Semitism. Again, I'm sure the CPS would disagree with what Gideon suggested about them, just for reasons of fairness.